So today we're going to talk about historical periods of Egyptian history. Here is the famous Narmer palette, so named for the pharaoh Narmer, also known as, aka Menes. This shows Narmer. It's kind of hard to see, it's a little fuzzy. I took this picture a long time ago through a glass case at the Egyptian Museum. So I apologize. I could probably find a better picture. But I like this one because I took it. Here you see our buddy Narmer, and he's wearing his crown. Can you see that? You see his crown? It kind of looks like, see, can you see that up there? No, you can't see that. It kind of looks like a bowling pin. That's what I always think. His crown looks like a bowling pin. And then in his hands, he's got his right hand up, and he's holding a stick with a ball on the end. That ball is stone. That's called a mace. And in his left hand, he's holding a guy by the hair. I get the feeling that Narmer's going to whack that guy in the head. I don't know for sure. But he's certainly subduing. That guy is in a position of being subordinate to Narmer. Basically, this Narmer palette designates the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Remember we talked about how there's the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, and how for a long time it was unified, but still in the Egyptians' mind we got Upper and Lower Egypt. The pharaoh that's given the credit for unifying all of Egypt is this guy, Narmer, and this is his palette. Okay? So that is a real pivotal date in the history of Egypt, is the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Okay. Now, how do we know about the historical periods? Well, there's a variety of ways, but the basic way is that we know from the writings of a guy by the name of Manetho. Who is Manetho? He lives in the 3rd century BC, so that means in the 200s. This is basically in the Ptolemaic period of Egyptian history. The Ptolemies were Greeks. Ptolemy was a general of Alexander the Great, and he set up a dynasty in Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. And so that means that Egypt then becomes kind of Greekified, if you will, Hellenized. And so Greek becomes the official language of the government. Manetho was a priest who knew how to read the hieroglyphs, but he also knew how to speak Greek. And so he is the guy who writes down the history of Egypt. He summarizes it and divides it into the periods that pretty much we still use today. Some people criticize Manetho and modified it a little bit, but to be quite honest, the basic outline of Manetho is still the starting point for Egyptology and the history of Egypt. Manetho divides the history of Egypt into 30 dynasties. 30 dynasties. Okay, what's a dynasty?
Multiple generations of a family controlling a country.
Yes, normally it's multiple generations. You're right, of a family unit or a family line that controls being the pharaoh, being the house, the royalty of the country. That's true, and actually a way to sort of govern the or gauge the stability of Egypt is to see how many dynasties you have, over so many years. The fewer dynasties you have, the more stable things were. When you have a lot of dynasties in a short amount of time, obviously there's a lot of turnover and trouble. Now, even before the dynastic period, there were people living in Egypt. So the pre-dynastic period, usually people begin at around 5000 BC. People are living in Egypt. We have evidence, we have, some ruins, some pottery, some tombs, and so forth, but we don't have the kind of dynastic organization that we have after 3100 BC. This is the period where Egypt is divided into Lower and Upper Egypt as two separate entities. But around 3100 BC, things change. From 3100, and again, I'm kind of rounding off the dates just to make them easier. I guess I could be more specific, but it gets a little bit harder to remember. So I think if I kind of round them off a little, and everybody recognizes I'm rounding them off, that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it so it's a little easier for you to just to remember, and then you can get the details as you go on. Okay? So for the sake of this discussion, we're going to say it's 3100 to 2700, so roughly 400 years of this early dynastic period, or sometimes some Egyptologists call it the Archaic period. The Archaic period. Now, in this 400 years, how many dynasties do we have? 2. The dynasties are always represented by Roman numerals. I don't know if you know Roman numerals, but the way that I find most students today, the only way people know Roman numerals today is football. Super Bowls, like, Super Bowl 29. And they put the Roman numeral, and they'll say, oh, that means 29. But, so anyway, I don't know if you know them or not, but almost that is the convention that is used to mark dynasties in Roman numerals. Okay? And it only goes up to 30, so that's pretty simple. All right, and of course I already mentioned our buddy Menes, or Narmer, as he's sometimes called. And he unifies Upper and Lower Egypt. By the way, on his palette, or this is, basically that is bigger than life size, what you see in front of you. It's about, 2.5 feet high. It's about 1.5 feet wide at the top, maybe 2 feet, and it kind of tapers down. On one side of this flat stone is the one you can see here with the bowling pin and the mace. On the other side, he's wearing a different crown. This crown looks like a chair. Always looks like a chair to me. So these are the crowns of Lower and Upper Egypt. And after this point, all pharaohs of Egypt wore what's called the combined crown, with the bowling, sort of like the chair with the bowling pin sticking out of it. Now, that's not what it is. It's just what it looks like to me. It's like papyrus and lotus and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the combined crown becomes then the real symbol of the pharaoh. Well, not just the pharaoh of the combined Egypt, Lower and Upper Egypt. Okay? All right, let's move on. So in our quick sketch of Egyptian history, this is just to sort of set the stage so as we go through the rest of the semester, you'll have some place to, as they used to say, hang your hat. But nobody says that anymore. You have a little pegs that you could sort of hang things on and say, okay, this is the Archaic period, early dynastic. Here is now the Old Kingdom. Here's the New Kingdom, and so forth. So the Old Kingdom, yes.
Did the political unification unify the culture more? Was it already unified because it was so isolated?
The culture, I would say it unified the culture even more. The culture was a little different between North and South. But remember, Egypt is only like 10 or 15 miles wide, but it's like, 400 miles long. So a lot of the culture is similar simply because a lot of the terrain is similar. You've got the river, you've got the fertile land, you've got the bluffs, and you've got the desert. It's really your geography often does that. But yeah, it is more unified now because you do have one unified government. But even before this, they had a lot of the same gods and goddesses.
And okay, another thing. So
Yeah.
I've been tutoring for the SAE for history and stuff.
Okay.
And one of the study guides that we have has the Old Kingdom. It says the Old Kingdom was the unification period. And it says Menes. That's how you say it, right?
Minis, yeah.
And then the Middle Kingdom was expansion. Like,
Yeah, okay.
and then the New Kingdom was
Dominance?
like, yeah, like imperialism.
Yeah.
And building but should I even be saying like anything about unification during the Old Kingdom, or is it like before?
Well, I mean, the unification, I think they're conflating, that sort of early dynastic and Old Kingdom together, seems to me. Because the early dynastic was 400 years. So I think a lot of the unification has taken place by the time you get to the Old Kingdom.
Okay.
Yeah. But certainly the Old Kingdom has very powerful rulers, would continue it because now you have these powerful rulers and, they're having people build the pyramids and...
Like setting the foundation.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. Well, the Old Kingdom, 2700 to 2200, again, rounded off dates. But this is now 500 years, right? If we're doing our math right, I think we're 500 years. And here you see a picture that I took a long time ago, kind of the back of the pyramids. Not that you probably would notice, but it is. And the one on the left is the Pyramid of Cheops, and the one on the right is the one of Khufu. The one on the left is actually bigger than the one on the right, although in this picture it doesn't appear that way. You can also see at the top of the picture, the top of the pyramid on the right, you can see the outer shell, the outer coating. Still, some of it still survives. All that's been taken off of of most of the pyramids, partially by gravity, but really a lot of it because people have take them off. Yeah, they take it off to build other things. It's easier to go tear apart the pyramid than to go quarry something yourself. So that's, and in fact, the tips of these, there's 3 pyramids there, would have had golden triangle, little golden pyramid at the top. You don't see that there either. I don't know what happened to that, probably. Well, that would have been quite a prize, wouldn't it? That would be. It was gold plated. I don't think it was solid gold, but still, it's a lot. Well, anyway, I put the pyramids here to remind us that the Old Kingdom is the Pyramid Age. Any pyramid you see in ancient Egypt was built during this period, this 500-year period. Okay? That's the only time they're building them. I also mentioned, since given the nature of our university, something, and that is that the patriarch Abraham, anybody know when people date the patriarch Abraham? He went to Egypt. 2000 is pretty close. I think about the oldest anybody puts him is 2100. About the youngest or the earliest or the latest anyone puts him is 1950. So yeah, 2000 is a good round date. So even by the earliest dating, the last pyramid would have been built 100 years before Abraham was born. So just think about that for a minute. That means when Abraham visits and he would see these pyramids, all of them would have been at least 100 years old. A lot of them would have been 400 or 500 years old, 300 years old. They would have been around for a long time. I have heard several people in sermons, Sunday school lessons, and so forth remark that the Hebrew slaves in Egypt built the pyramids or helped to build the pyramids. I don't know if you've ever heard that or not. But if you have heard that, it's simply not correct. It doesn't make any sense chronologically.
They weren't working with stone either, they were working with mud brick.
Well, that's true. That's because they're working in the delta in the land of Goshen. And they are building, they're building mud brick on. This is all stone, right? Well, and also they are, depending, the earliest anyone puts them would be around 1440, which means that it would be some 800 years 700 or 800 years since the last pyramid was built. The time of Moses and so forth. All right? Maybe more. So, I just throw that in there because that is something I've heard more than once. The ancient Hebrew slaves had nothing to do with building these pyramids. These pyramids were all built hundreds of years before they were enslaved. Okay? Anyway. Now, what dynasties are we talking about? Remember, this is 500 years. We're talking about 3, 4, 5, and 6. 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's 4 dynasties in 500 years. That's pretty stable. This is the Old Kingdom. It's also sometimes called the Pyramid Age for that reason, because this is when the pyramids were built. Now, what are pyramids used for? You know this.
Religious significance, burials.
Yeah, burials. Tombs of the pharaohs. Obviously, very important people, right? Your regular Egyptian does not get buried in a pyramid. But a pharaoh does. They're tombs of the pharaohs. Okay. And you also know that they're made out of stone. We just mentioned that, built out of limestone. Now, the most famous of the pyramids and the greatest of the pyramids, that is the largest of the pyramids, is the one pictured here on the left, which is the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Also known, Khufu has also been called in earlier times, as Cheops. So you might find some sources that refer to this as the Great Pyramid of Cheops. It's the same pyramid. It's just a different understanding of how we ought to transliterate and say ancient Egyptian names. Okay? So notice the dates here, and I try to give you more precise dates of the Great Pyramid of the reign of Khufu. 2551 to 2521. All right, so what do we got there? Like 23 years. 23 years. If you want to see the Great Pyramids if you go to Egypt, and I hope you get to go someday, you'll definitely go here. I remember the first time I was in Egypt, and the first time I saw the pyramids, I knew some guys who were actually from Egypt. They were going to the school at the seminary where I was going. And so when they found out I was coming to Egypt, they said, well, we'll come over and get you. And so they came over and they got me in a little Fiat. And there was like 4 or 5 of us in this little Fiat. And they just drove us right up to the pyramids. It was really amazing. Yeah, well, let's take it. Yeah, you want to go see the pyramids? Sure, let's go. And so they just drive us over to Giza, and then they just driving right out there. There's no parking lot. They're just right out there next, kind of like those cars are, just out there by the pyramids. So it was kind of neat. That was my first. That was at night, so I saw the pyramids first at night. But they're on the plain of Giza. Giza is near the modern city of Cairo. Now, where did Egyptians generally bury the dead? I think we might have mentioned this before. Let's say you're an Egyptian. Unfortunately, one of your relatives dies. Where would all the Egyptian cemeteries be located?
The west of the Nile.
On the west of the Nile, exactly. Yeah. Did we say that before? Or you just knew it. We did say it before. He remembers. He's staying awake. It's hard for him today, but he's staying awake. Yes, it's on the west side of the Nile, right? Because remember, it's the place of the dead. It's where the sun sets. The Egyptians are very much about worshiping what we might call nature deities connected with the dealings of nature, the sun, the moon, the wind, the storm, fertility of the plants. You're going to find all ancient cultures, really most pre-modern cultures, are very concerned about these things. Why do you think that is? People today aren't as concerned. Well, they get concerned when there's a hurricane, right? About the wind and the rain, but typically we're not too concerned. I guess if we're going to go to the beach, we want it to be a nice day.
I guess it's just because it ties directly to their survival.
Yeah, their survival. Yeah, you're right. I think that hits it right on the head, because for us, typically, certainly here in the United States, if it rains, it doesn't rain. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe there's some problems with some weather somewhere. That means the price of something goes up. Like avocados have gotten more expensive or something, or whatever, or maybe like banana, or whatever it is. Oh, the bananas are going to go up by 5 cents a pound because there was some trouble in Central America or something. And in other words, we're not too worried about, it's like, oh, the wind came in and they blew the stuff over, and now we're all going to be dead in a year or 6 months. That's what it meant for these people. Because if the crop doesn't grow, if the storm blows them all down, if a blight comes or insects come and they eat it all, well, it could potentially mean I die, or my family dies, or both, or a lot of people I know are in big, big trouble. That's not the position, fortunately, we find ourselves in today. We just go to a different food source, right? Or we just pay the little extra for it, or whatever. But it wasn't that way for ancient people. So I think it's important to understand that's why they were so in tune with what we might call nature, weather, sun, moon, storms, wind, rain, lightning. These are all things that could lead directly or indirectly into their death or their survival, certainly their well-being. And so these kind of nature gods, as we might call them, we find them. You find them in Greek culture, Roman culture, Egyptian culture, Mesopotamian culture. They are there. The goddess of fertility. It's always a female. For obvious reasons, at least obvious to me. All right? There are some things that the ladies can do the men cannot do. And I think if you would like to know what those things are, we have a few ladies in the class here who would be glad to make a list for you. But I'm only talking about one thing right now, and that is from the female comes the new life, not from the male. So if you want fertility, you got to focus on the feminine. You got to focus on the female, because they're the ones that give birth. They're the ones that have fertility. They're the ones. And so the female deity, a female deity, at least one of them, becomes a fertility deity, because you want not only to have your children, but you also want your crops to give birth, right? You want your seeds to germinate and make a plant. You want the plants to be fertile and have whatever the wheat or whatever they're producing, right? The trees that produce the figs or whatever, okay? So fertility is important. Rain, very important. You don't have the rain, nothing, or you have too much rain, as we're seeing in North Carolina, right? Too much rain. Either way, rain is an issue. Sun is an issue. Wind is an issue. All right. Giza. Giza then is on the west of the Nile, because as we somehow, when I started all this, we were talking about where they buried them, and they always bury them on the west. They bury them on the west because the sun sets in the west, and they believe that the sun god, or the sun, is really the dominant god of the ancient Egyptians. And since the sun sets there, it's sort of like the sun is dying there. But then the sun comes back up the next day in the other sky, so reborn. So the Egyptians had an idea that the universe, or at least this sun, actually didn't die. It was a big circle. It went in a big circle. It was born every morning, it died every evening, but guess what? As soon as it was dying, it was being reborn in the underworld, and it went through the sky, in quotes, of the underworld and came around, and then when it died in the underworld, it was born in this world. It's a cycle. It's a circle. It's the circle of life. And some people stole that idea and made it into a movie or a song. So the circle of life. That the sun goes through a cycle, a circle. In fact, one tomb I was in, I don't remember which tomb it was in. I'm sure it's in more than one tomb. But I remember it quite distinctly. It was in a pharaonic tomb in the Valley of the Kings. They show a goddess who is giving birth to literally giving birth to the sun. This is not a biology class, so I will not explain what that means. But she is giving birth to the sun. And then you see it kind of going through the sky, right, across the tomb, and then she's swallowing it. So she swallows it, and then she gives birth to it, and it just goes over and over and over. That's the cycle of it. Okay, well, you can think about that. I like to give you stuff to think about on occasion. Now, according to our good buddy Herodotus, and you guys know Herodotus, right? We have a Herodotus Society here on campus. He's sometimes called the father of history. Those are labels people don't like to use anymore. But we call it the Herodotus Society. History club. By the way, we're the ones in part sponsoring this thing today at 4 o'clock at least, which is a graduate of Southeastern is going to speak about his work for a Florida senator who will remain nameless. You will find out when you come this afternoon. And he's worked for him for several years. Anyway, Herodotus says that it took 100,000 men 20 years to build the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Now, again, those are round numbers, round number of years, but I think it gives us a good idea, while perhaps not a precise number, a good idea that this is taking a huge amount of people a very long time. And in fact, the pyramids were started right at the beginning of the reign. So he reigned for, what did we say, 23 years, something like that. They were building this pyramid pretty much his whole life. And when it gets around to the end, of course, fortunately, he waits to die until they pretty much get it done. All right, well, it's huge. And I've taken groups there, several groups of students to go see the pyramids over the years. And every time I take a group of people to the pyramids, this is what they say. Oh, that's much bigger than I thought it was. They always say that. Even if I try to prepare them, I say, look, this is huge. This is a huge thing. So just to try to give you an idea, even though this will not still when you go there, you'll say, wow, that's bigger than what I thought. But here are some of the dimensions. If you walked along one side of that pyramid from corner to corner, it's 775 feet. And then you would turn left and go 775 feet, turn left, so on. And then you'd be back to where you started. But think about that, 775 feet. All right? A football field is 100 yards. That's roughly 300 feet. So that is about more than two. It's not quite 2.5 football fields that you would be walking. More than 2 football fields, lengths, from goalpost to goalpost, that you would walk. And that would just be one side. And then you'd have to turn and do that again, turn and do that again. If you set the pyramid, if you could pick it up, which of course you can't, but if you could pick it up and you set it down, you would need at least 13 acres to set it down. It covers 13 acres of land. It's 481 feet high. It's lost a few feet. People took the gold thing off the top. They've taken some of the facing off of it. But it was 481 feet high, which was the highest man-made structure until, I think, the end of the 19th century. In other words, it was the largest man-made structure for over 4,000 years. It's tall, tallest. And it's just massive. It's huge. It's estimated that there are 2.5 million blocks of stone that the estimated weight would be 2.5 tons each. The blocks at the bottom are larger than the ones at the top. The ones at the bottom are taller than me. If I put my arms out like this, it's a lot longer than that. It's 2 or 3 times. One of the blocks would be like from the corner of the room almost to where he's sitting over there. Some of them, maybe right about there, and it'd be about 8 feet high. Huge block. I mean, it's unbelievable. The number, the size, and the number of the blocks. I guess we're out of time, aren't we? Yes.
Yeah.
All right. What's that?
No, I was just looking at the clock. I thought we had more time.
Yeah, so did I.